Okay, just so that people don't think that I have completely lost my mind. I just saw it again. I just saw this blinking light, my UFO, and I'm going to circle the block and come back around to it and see where it's at. So I'm about to turn onto Oak Street in Bristow, and I'm going to turn the camera around, and we'll see if the light. There it is. Let's look. Okay, coming up Oak. There's a little kitty cat crossing the street. There it is. Blinking, flashing. What is that? I just want to know. Where'd it go? Right there. I'm going to circle around one more time. I might wind up being late for work, but we'll see. I just want to know what this thing is over here. It's just driving me crazy. Because when I come around this way, there's the water tower. It's gone. There's the water tower. You can hardly see because it's dark. But that's it. I don't know. I don't know what this thing is. I'm just curious. I don't want to drive around people's neighborhood this early in the morning, and I sure don't want to be late for work. I just want to know what in the world that thing is that's flashing over by the water tower. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. My name's Don Van Zant, and this is the Lost Mission podcast, where our goal is to help us as believers get back to our mission of knowing and sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ. Thanks so much for joining us today. It's been a few months since we've recorded. Summertime happens, so summertime has wound down, and I may have a little more time to invest back into the podcast. And it's good to be back. It's always good to come back after a break. But as you could see from that video that we just played, that was a video of me earlier this year driving my truck to work early one morning, and I kept seeing this same flickering light just about 2 blocks north of my house, over by the water tower off of Oak Street. I don't know what it was, but it piqued my curiosity. I wanted to know what it was. Look, I'm still not saying it was an alien. Kind of. I'm still not saying it was an alien, except for maybe just in good fun, to have a good time. But I do know I saw the same flashing light in the same location on multiple occasions, a couple of years apart. I saw this thing in the same spot, and I just want to know what it was. I've all but proven it was not something associated with the water tower, nearby houses, or with the distant radio towers far away. I just simply, I don't know what the thing was that I saw, and it made me really curious, and I want to know. And all of that curiosity led me to this discussion, led me to this conversation, led me to this in-depth study that I have done, and to the question, are aliens real? Let's talk about it today. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pour up this drink. It is a Spratcher cream soda, fire brewed craft soda made with real honey. I'm going to pour it up into this cup. That way it stays nice and cold. I'm going to play an intro, and we are going to talk about aliens today. So let's do it. Let's talk about aliens. Today we're discussing the topic of aliens and or extraterrestrial life. Are aliens real? Should we be worried about them? Does the Bible talk about aliens? What about UFOs? Has the government been just lying to us the whole time? Aliens. And I think it's going to be a good episode. I think we're going to have a good time today. It will most likely take me a couple of episodes to get through the bulk of this information, just because there's so very much to discuss here. There's so very much to talk about, but we want to talk about it. We want to have this conversation. And look, I'm going to tell you at the front of this video, at the beginning of this podcast, I really, really want there to be aliens. I want that to be true. I think it's awesome. I've always been fascinated with all things related to space travel or astronauts. Like every kid, I went through my phase where I wanted to be an astronaut when I was younger, and it's just always fascinated me. I've loved sci-fi movies, Star Wars, Alien, Predator. I've loved sci-fi books, and just anything related to space travel, time travel, aliens, any of that has always been super cool to me. But is it a reality? I don't know. We'll see. Now we've been away from our main focus for some time. I realize that this show is centered upon the idea of discipleship, apologetics, doctrine, and those types of things. We've ventured away from that in the past many months. I do hope to get back to the discussion of holiness at some point. So I've not abandoned that series entirely. There are just other things that have creeped up. And so here we are. We're talking about aliens today. So let's get into it. Okay, historically, when we think of an alien throughout history, this is not simply a new phenomenon that has occurred in the past 40 or 50 years, 100 years. It's not. As a matter of fact, if you go all the way back to the beginning of recorded human history, there's discussion surrounding extraterrestrial life. Now, it may not have been during that day and age, but when we look back to that period, the conversation exists. Historically, the search for ancient astronauts, where did mankind come from? Why are human beings superior to all the other animals on this planet? How did man develop knowledge of crafts, architecture, writing, and other elements of civilization? How did that happen? People, they really seem to have been asking this question for centuries, since the dawn of history. They're answered in books, they're answered in holy writings, in myths, in legends of virtually every tribe on earth. We're going to talk about some of those tribes in this episode, but it goes back. The question travels all the way back. And really, I want to try to get us all the way back to the beginning of human civilization, to the beginning of really what we would consider to be humanity. Guys, this cream soda is fantastic. They're like $1.25 at Dollar Tree. I just want to put a plug in there for them. Go get you one. Keep it nice and chilled. They're delicious. Okay, let's get on point. Back to the ancient history with the Sumerian peoples. When we discuss the possibility of extraterrestrial life, begin to look over history, a few things seem to pop up again and again and again. Many Central and South American legends exist surrounding alien life. Among these legends, there are those that surround the Mayan and the Aztec peoples in sort of the Mesoamerican region, Central South America. Another interesting legend through this mythos is those surrounding Sumerian cultures in the ancient Near East. Now, you may think, you've probably heard this word Sumerian before. You've probably heard discussions of Sumerians in some way. Now don't confuse that with the biblical concept of the Samaritans. They're not the same. Sumerians and Samaritans, not the same things. All right. So when you read in the Bible where Jesus says, I must go through Samaria, it's different than Sumeria. Or when he deals with the Samaritan woman, or the parable of the Good Samaritan, those are not the Sumerians. Those are Samaritans. They're not the same thing. Let me just say that. Okay. But likely you've heard of Sumerians. If you're a fan of horror films or sort of that dark side of things, you've likely heard of them, and you may not have even realized it. Many horror and thriller movies are steeped in Sumerian mythology. For example, one lesser-known film that deals with extraterrestrial life and mixes a lot of Sumerian mythology into it is a film from several years ago starring Mila Jovovich, titled The Fourth Kind, and it is a terrifying film to watch. Matter of fact, I couldn't finish it because it scared me too bad. The Fourth Kind Now, if you're an old head and you like old horror, the Evil Dead franchise is based on Sumerian myths. I believe the Book of Death in that is an ancient Sumerian text. Also, if you've ever seen the movie Ghostbusters, I love Ghostbusters. I grew up on Ghostbusters. I'm a huge Ghostbuster fan, always have been. Egon is my guy. And but they are based on battling an old ancient Sumerian goddess, Gozer the Gozerian, whether actual myth or otherwise, Sumerian mythology is mixed into the Ghostbusters. And possibly most sinister of all, when we think of Sumerian mythology bleeding over into modern entertainment, is the now I guess you would consider classic horror film based on the novel The Exorcist, where the young girl Reagan is possessed by the demon Pazuzu. It's super spooky stuff, and it's definitely kept me up late at night on more than one occasion. Those things are terrifying, and they should be, but they are rooted in ancient mythology of a people that actually existed, and there's overlap actually in your Bible where they deal with the Sumerians. But what are these legends? Okay, who are these mysterious ancient astronauts that fill our TV sets and intrigue our minds, that we just wonder, who are these ancient astronauts? If you've seen the show Ancient Aliens, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. They like to discuss ancient astronauts, but who are these guys? Well, in Sumerian mythology, they have a name. They are a group of gods, Sumerian deities, that are referred to as the Anunnaki. As a matter of fact, I believe our English word, the Christian term angel, has the same root word that the word Anunnaki. So the Anunnaki and the angel, comes from the same root word. Feel free to check me on that, but I think I'm right. The Anunnaki were the god class of beings in ancient Mesopotamian Babylon and Syria. In the Babylonian Syrian religions, you had the idea of the Anunnaki. In the Bible, the ancient Hittites. So in the book of Genesis, when Abraham deals with the Hittites, they were worshipers of the Anunnaki. So likely people like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob were well acquainted with the worship of these Anunnaki. Whether they actually called them that or not is up for debate. They probably didn't. There was likely a different name for them. But the idea still exists that Abraham dealt with the Anunnaki. As a matter of fact, Abraham will purchase the burial cave, the only piece of land that Abraham ever actually owned after being promised this great land by Yahweh, by the Hebrew God. He only ever actually purchases one piece of property, and it's a small cave referred to as Machpelah. It's a beautiful romantic story where he buries his late wife Sarah. It later becomes a burial ground for men like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, etc., etc. But he purchases this plot of ground from the Hittites, who would have been worshipers of the Anunnaki. Matter of fact, Esau, in the book of Genesis, chapter 26, is going to marry a Hittite woman, possibly multiple Hittite women. And probably the most famous Hittite that you're not even aware of is one that you have just said his name in Bible study and moved past it without realizing who this person actually was. One of David's mighty men, Uriah the Hittite, who was the husband of Bathsheba, who would eventually become the father of Solomon the king. So one of the great kings of Israel had Hittite background and ancestry coming behind him, and would have come up from this type of worship. So there's quite a bit of overlap with Anunnaki worship and the worship of Yahweh in the Old Testament. There's this battle back and forth, God calling them away from the worship of these false gods, of these Anunnaki, and into worship of himself. But who are these people? Who are these deities that they would have had this constant combat with? A few names to familiarize you with. The first is Enlil, the god of the atmosphere, earth, fire, and storms. Here's what Enlil would do. Enlil. He would decree the fates of men and of the gods. See, there was this hierarchy between God and men that existed in their mythos, that the gods were not necessarily sovereign over man. Man could rebel and fight against the gods. So he would decree the fates of both the gods and men, and his decrees could not be undone. All right, he was one of their sort of three supreme gods. Not only was there Enlil, there was also Enki. He was the god of the oceans, a god of wisdom and mischief. He was another of the three supreme gods. The other was Anu, god of the sky, the third of this supreme god, this sort of unholy trinity that existed within the Anunnaki. He is the supreme god, the one who sort of gives all the other gods their power. So he was the boss. He was the boss god of all the gods. Was Anu. Another one you may be familiar with is the goddess Ishtar. She's the goddess of love, of sexual love, and of warfare. In Greek mythology, later she will be very closely associated with the goddess Venus. Maybe not the exact same, but there will be parallels between Ishtar and Venus with the Anunnaki and the Greek mythology. Also, the god Pazuzu. He's terrifying. Pazuzu is terrifying. In pop culture, probably more so than even in this culture, because he really personifies what we think of when we think of evil and darkness and the terrors of the night and people that are going to get hurt when they deal with Pazuzu. So Pazuzu is the demon king that is in the movie Exorcist. Poor little Reagan is possessed by Pazuzu, who is an ancient Sumerian deity. There's actually a pretty detailed shot of Pazuzu in the beginning of the movie as he faces off with one of the archaeologists at the very beginning of the film when they're in, I want to say, Iraq. I want to say it's Iraq. Don't go watch the movie because it's not healthy for you. I don't recommend it. But just saying that it was there. The archaeologist goes to a dig site where he's met by armed guards and allowed access to the statue of Pazuzu. The tone shifts and eerie sort of music begins to play. You see dogs fighting in the background. It's just very unsettling, very uncomfortable. The sun begins to sink low as the doctor and this statue of this god Pazuzu have this sort of face off. He's evil. He is the personification of evil, and he's the one they're going to do battle with throughout the course of the film. He's known as being king of the wind demons and would serve to ward off other demons. A side note here, for those of you true crime enthusiasts, there was actually a popular serial murderer, terrifying guy, who legally changed his name to Pazuzu and was a pretty bad dude. Vice did a pretty incredible documentary on this guy, Pazuzu, and his house of horrors. So Pazuzu was one of their deities. A couple more you may be familiar with are Enkidu and Gilgamesh. Now, these two are almost intertwined, almost inseparable in Anunnaki literature. The Epic of Gilgamesh being one of the most ancient texts of all time. I have a copy of it somewhere. I've read through it. It's an interesting tale. It's lighthearted and fun and adventurous. But these two are the heart of the Epic of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh, being the hero of the story, is one part God and one part human. Unlike Jesus in the Christian story, who is fully God and fully man, okay, or as R.C. Sproul would say, truly God and truly man. Gilgamesh is part God, part man, making him sort of a hybrid god, sort of a demigod. He's the king of Uruk. He has his friend Enkidu. Enkidu is created to serve as a rival to Gilgamesh. So they're supposed to have a conflict between these two godlike figures. The gods create Enkidu to hopefully go to war with Gilgamesh. Well, they become friends, slaying other deities, going on adventures, and conquering and fighting together until eventually Enkidu will die. And it's a sad moment in the story. His death really breaks up Gilgamesh and causes him to reevaluate himself, to reevaluate his priorities, and he goes on an adventure of self-discovery after the death of Enkidu. Eventually, Gilgamesh is going to cross the Great Sea, and there he's going to meet the only surviving person of the what was considered the worldwide flood in the Epic of Gilgamesh, akin to the story of Noah. And there he meets this man, Utnapishtim, the only human survivor of the Sumerian flood tale. So you have all of these gods that exist in the lore of the Anunnaki. It's an elaborate system that existed. There were a lot of them, and their legend still prevails throughout both the alien conversation and sort of in horror mythology to this very day. But what about the Anunnaki and ancient astronauts? What is the overlap? What's the tie-in? In recent history, theories have began to surface stating that rather than gods and goddesses of antiquity, the Anunnaki were actually ancient aliens from a distant planet called Nibiru. This is hilarious to me because it sounds so ridiculous. Unless you want to give it some thought, then it sounds believable, and you have this tension that goes back and forth. Well, could it be, or could it? I don't know. But the legend states this: atmospheric conditions were deteriorating on Nibiru. So the Anunnaki used their advanced technology to search the cosmos as the first astronauts. Eventually, they discovered Earth, began mining it for its resources. One of the major resources they mined was gold. Tales of colonization and war followed until eventually the Anunnaki began crossbreeding with the creatures on Earth. A race known as man was created because of this crossbreeding with the creatures on Earth. There were no men as you and I exist today in this mythology, but the Anunnaki bred with the creatures that were on this planet they had discovered until eventually they developed a race, one part Anunnaki, one part something else, and these men were... these were known as man. And the first successful human man was named Adamu. Maybe you've heard of him. We call him Adam. So after several millennia, the Nibiru would complete its next orbit. So what happens is the planet Nibiru has a different orbit than the other planets in our solar system, and it only comes around ever so many thousand of years. It would complete its next orbit, and its gravitational pull would have catastrophic effects on the Earth, flooding, fires, etc. The Anunnaki would then flee Earth because they'd gotten everything they needed. They had all the resources they needed. Now this planet was seemingly about to die, so they bounced out. Our planet's close. It causes catastrophic failure on Earth. They get on their spaceships and they fly away, and leaving Earth to its own devices. And then mankind becomes the dominant race on Earth, and he begins to rule the Earth. That's the ancient astronaut theory that exists surrounding the Anunnaki and Nibiru and planet Earth. But the thing is this mysterious planet X has never really been discovered. Nibiru has never been found by modern scientists. However, there is some speculation, at least some, that there's another planet in our solar system that we've not discovered. At least some. I believe on a mathematical scale, they've tried to figure this out. That it could actually exist in our system. So this planet would be similar in size to Jupiter and would only orbit the sun once every 3,000 to 12,000 years. And apparently at this point in time, it would be so far out on its orbit that there would be no possible way for us to see it for several thousand more years. And again, it's never been found. So Nibiru, Planet X, Planet 9, whatever you want to call it, is only a hypothesis at best. It's an educated guess at the very best. Same for the Anunnaki. They are an educated guess at the very best. But going all the way back to the beginnings of humanity, there is this discussion surrounding alien life forms, surrounding extraterrestrials. It does exist, at least in some way. It's there. But let's look forward a little bit. What about the Catholic Church? For some reason, the Catholic Church is always embroiled in these controversies surrounding anything conspiratorial. If there's a conspiracy somewhere, you're going to hear about the Roman Catholic Church being involved by that one guy. He's just going to tell you about it. Hey, it's the Catholics. But is the Catholic Church hiding some ancient alien secret? So it's really no shock to see that the alien conversation actually dates all the way back, not only to the Sumerians, but all the way back to the early days of Christianity, with men like St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas entering into the extraterrestrial conversation. Even today, there's still debate amongst Catholics about whether aliens exist or not. They're still talking about it. So Protestants aren't the only ones. Conspiracy theorists aren't the only ones. It's a lot there. The Roman Catholic Church. Okay, this is it's a rabbit hole, and it's tinfoil hat territory for sure. I actually have my tinfoil hat back there on the shelf. Maybe I should get it out and put it on for this segment. Conspiracies abound. Most of them laughable. Most of them just hilarious. But some of them are true concerning the cosmos and Catholics. I'll share with you one, maybe a couple of conspiracy theories surrounding the Catholic Church and aliens. One is around a project that the Catholic Church is certainly involved in. The project is titled Project Lucifer. It's a real thing. Project Lucifer. Look it up. Type Project Lucifer Catholic Church. You'll find it. The urban legend states that a Catholic observatory in Arizona owns a telescope that's used for viewing stars and attempting to understand their origin. I say urban legend, but it's more true story at this point. The telescope does exist. It's officially named... The telescope is officially named Large Binocular Telescope Near Infrared Utility with Camera and Integral Field Unit for Extragalactic Research, or Lucifer for short. This is because of the Latin word Lucifer being meaning morning star, which is true. It is a Latin translation of the word meaning morning star. But the idea of a Catholic telescope named Lucifer makes for lots and lots of interesting conspiracy theories and stories. There are even books that's been written on Project Lucifer. They want to say that the Catholic Church is doing some alien research under being real secretive by calling it the devil. Then in 2014, Time magazine ran an interesting article on Pope Francis after he mentioned that he would baptize aliens. He just threw it out there, apparently trying to be the cool guy. And after making comments about green men with long noses and big ears like children draw, he mentioned the inclusivity of the Catholic Church, and for extra emphasis said, "Who are we to close doors?" So he alluded to that if aliens existed, he wouldn't be opposed to the idea of baptizing them. Whistleblower David Grush, David Grush, God bless him. Whistleblower David Grush claims the Vatican has known about UFOs for decades and has even assisted in UFO retrieval efforts. But officially, after reading through several blogs and more official Roman Catholic statements surrounding the idea of extraterrestrial life, the church has no official position on this. There's just conversation had amongst them. Now, David Grush says that they have all this intelligence, but that depends whether you believe David Grush or not. That's up to you. I'll let you make that decision. I wanted to talk a lot more about David Grush later in the episode. We probably just won't have the time to really deep dive on David Grush. Thomas Aquinas. Among famous Catholic theologians that have at least alluded to the possibility of alien life is Thomas Aquinas. And I'm no expert on Aquinas. I'm not an expert on Catholicism at all. So my knowledge base is so limited here. But it seemed as though Aquinas may have viewed extraterrestrial life as actually more so as fallen angels, and that has been reinterpreted in modern times to encompass the idea of extraterrestrial life. I don't know, but Aquinas comes up in the conversation. But not just in ancient Sumerians, not just in the Catholic Church, but also there's conversation surrounding aliens and the possibility of extraterrestrial life when you discuss Egypt. Oh yes, you have to have this conversation if you're going to talk about aliens. Were the pyramids built by aliens? Here we go. This is, oh man, we could spend episodes and episodes discussing this topic because it's a rich topic and there's so much here, so much that I don't understand. But here we go. For 4,500 years, the pyramids have captivated and mystified explorers, researchers, historians, and tourists. Modern archaeologists and sociologists discuss them. And all the way back to the Roman and the Greek era and beyond, these massive structures remain a mystery. We still don't understand them to this very day. But there are certain clues hidden inside that might reveal secrets of possible otherworldly involvement in their construction and in their use. Now, I do find it interesting to note that we mentioned Abraham earlier, that during the days of Abraham, when he sojourns in Egypt, these pyramids likely already existed at that time. They were present in the background. So think of while you're reading about Abraham and Sarah and the Egyptian pharaohs, put the pyramids in the background of your thought. It creates a really interesting word picture for me. And certainly the boy Moses would have been familiar with them. As Moses grows up as one of Pharaoh's sons, he would have been very familiar with the pyramids. So the pyramids weren't built by the Israelite slaves in the days of Moses. The timeline just doesn't work. So for hundreds, possibly thousands of years, the pyramids existed before the first word of the Hebrew Torah was penned. That is fascinating to me. These outdate our own holy scriptures by a long shot. And like I said, the Jews couldn't have built them because they were there before the Jews were there. So I've never seen the pyramids. I've never been to, Egypt. I've never seen any of these great massive structures like the Great Pyramids. So the sheer massiveness is lost on me because all I have is research to go on. But one report that I read said the Great Pyramid is constructed of some 2.3 million blocks of stone. 2.3 million. Weighing approximately 2.5 tons each. That's your average size. Much bigger, and certainly there would be some that are much smaller as well. The Smithsonian records this in regard to the pyramid size and their destruction. Their construction. The largest and most famous of all the pyramids, the Great Pyramid of Giza, was commissioned by Snefru's son Khufu, known also as Cheops. The later form is his Greek name. The pyramid's base covered 13 acres and at its side rose at an angle of 51 degrees. And they were over 750 feet long. It originally stood 481 feet high, but today stands 450 feet, I'm assuming due to things like erosion. Scientists estimate that its stone blocks average over 2 tons apiece, with the largest weighing as much as 15 tons. But how such a massive structure, something so big and so large in scope and in size, and it would take great precise designing, how did they do this? How? I don't know. I wish that I knew. I wish that I understood all of the ins and outs of ancient methods of architecture and of construction, but I simply do not. How did they do this? If Khufu oversaw the construction of the Great Pyramid in around 2600 BC, 4,500 years ago, if he oversaw the structure, the construction of the pyramids then, how did he do it? Without the use of modern construction methods, laser levels, anti-gravity guns, antimatter devices, or even the will, how did Khufu pull this incredible feat off? Now, a lot of suggestions exist. Some suggestions have been made that crews of upwards around 400,000 workers toiled for 20 years to erect these massive structures. And this may or may not be accurate, but it was at least the speculation of one historian, the Greek historian Herodotus, who may or may not be trustworthy, but it is speculation. There's a lot to this. There's so much to this conversation, but basically it's believed that workers, both men and oxen, would source cedars from Lebanon. There's a biblical reference there. Would source cedars from Lebanon that would then be constructed into a sort of sled, and they would transport these massive stones from quarry areas to build locations and put them up into place. While not easy, it does at least seem possible. I believe there are ancient cave writings that are used, or on the pyramids, there are carvings made that depict men working with these sort of primitive types of sleds, moving these large stones along and up and into place. It's at least plausible. It's at least possible. It doesn't seem impossible for that to happen. Or aliens did it. Or aliens did it. So this theory was first popularized by Eric von Daniken, hotel manager turned UFO researcher turned author, famous for his book, The Chariots of the Gods. And I've read portions of Chariots of the Gods. It's interesting. In the book, von Daniken claims there was no way the pyramids could have been built in the lifespan of one man, in the lifetime of Khufu. There's no way. Rather, he claims they were constructed by the ancient Sumerian Anunnaki and only visited by Khufu. So what Khufu does, according to von Daniken, is these structures already exist in his time. He goes and he visits them, and he leaves his marks all over the pyramids, like a bathroom stall. Khufu was here. Thus confusing historians for millennia into thinking he built them when really it was aliens the whole time. Von Daniken isn't the only person to make this claim, though. Elon Musk seems to think something similar. And of course, Giorgio A. Tsoukalos of Ancient Aliens fame, the aliens guy, he thinks the same thing, that, of course, aliens built them, couldn't have been Khufu. But do any of these theories seem convincing or even likely that aliens came down and built them, that Khufu just kind of took it for his own? I don't think so. I'm going to have to say no on that one. I don't think so. From the small bit of research I've done, it seems entirely possible, even probable, that ordinary men like you and me built these pyramids. And much mystery surrounds the reason for their construction. And that still remains a mystery to me to this day. But their construction itself seems human in nature, human in origin. And just because we don't understand it doesn't mean it didn't happen. Doesn't necessitate that an extraterrestrial being built it. So I don't really buy the ancient aliens and pyramids discussion. But what about ancient aliens in Central and South America thousands of years ago? Similar stories, similar circumstances with things like the Mayan pyramids and the Aztecs on the other side of the globe. Similar legends exist. But without deep diving, I simply just have to acknowledge that I don't have all of these answers. I don't understand all of these things. People with far greater knowledge than myself, far greater resources and education, have done far more than I could ever do with this issue of ancient civilizations and of ufology. I just don't understand all of it. But I think that the same principle that we can use with the Egyptian pyramids would translate over to these South American, Central American pyramids with the Mayans and the Aztecs, etc. Sorry to disappoint if anybody was really looking for me to deep dive on that. I don't have a lot. But in more modern times, what about the chupacabra? Is the chupacabra really just an alien dog? Is that what we have? So, in case you're not aware of the chupacabra and the legend, I believe it originates in Puerto Rico. There's this legend of the chupacabra. Now, I thought the chupacabra was an ancient, old tale that's been told for generations and a long time. Well, come to find out, it's really not all that old. 80s, maybe 90s is when it first began to be popularized, this idea of the chupacabra. Here's the story. On March 11th, 1995, outside the small town of Orocovos, Puerto Rico, 8 sheep were found dead. So 1995. 8 sheep were found dead. The animals were reported to have 3 strange marks or puncture holes in the chest and were described as being completely drained of blood. It's 8 sheep, though. It's only 8. So not much thought is really given to the incident, and life quickly resumes in Puerto Rico. And everything's back to normal for the community. This is in March. But then, in August of that same year, 1995, some 63 miles to the east in the city of Canavanas, if I'm saying that correctly, some 150 animals were found dead in a period of just a few days, dying of similar causes in similar ways, with bite marks on them and supposedly drained of their blood. Well, the people of Puerto Rico became very unsettled very quickly. Witnesses began claiming a creature unlike anything they had ever seen before was responsible for the slayings. They began referring to the creature as the goat sucker, or the Spanish version, the chupacabra. According to the New York Times, the chupacabra was described in various ways, including the following. It jumped like a kangaroo and smelled like sulfur. It was ugly as a demon and flew through the air. It was described as a vampire-like predator. And one eyewitness, Madeline Guadalupe, described it as above 4 feet tall, and it had huge, elongated red eyes, a pointy, long tongue that came in and out of its mouth. It was gray, but its back changed colors. It was a monster. This monster sent the island into a state of panic, and a modern folk legend was born, the legend of the chupacabra. The legend became a bit of a pop culture icon, being referenced in movies and TV, and just recently, let's see, and I believe it was earlier this year, not long ago, Netflix gave it its own family-friendly movie adaptation. I think it's called Chupa or Cabra or something like that. So the legend still exists. While theories, explanations, and descriptions abound, some describe the creature as none other than either a forgotten, abandoned alien or a forgotten alien pet. That's right. An alien dog. But what about the chupacabra and the UFO connection? What's the tie-in there? So the UFO connection and the chupacabra goes this way. Luminous, oval, and pyramidal shaped UFOs have been seen in the vicinity where animals have been mutilated and found to be without blood. These have been reported in the towns of Cabo Rojo, Canavanas, Ponce, Naranjito. These are all very far apart. In Barrio Hato, the Rojas family observed a UFO. A horse and several goats were found mutilated shortly after this observation. So where the UFOs are, animals die. Another person had this say, a female witness also observed the creature in the Canavanas municipality in the early days of November. The ABE, or the anomalous biological entity, the chupacabra, jumped over her car or flew around it and entered a round, luminous object over her car. This thing comes bolting out of the trees over the top of the car and into some sort of vehicle, some sort of flying vehicle. What it was, we don't really know. Maybe it was an alien puppy dog, and they're saying, "Come on, boy, come on, Astro, in." I don't know. An interesting point of note, though, is this, and we'll try to come back toward the end of the episode and really talk about this issue a little bit, but I want to at least mention it here and now. An interesting point of note is the high presence of occult activity in Puerto Rico. Could this connection have a darker and more sinister element? Possibly. That's a possibility. Could there be more to it? Could the occult tie-in actually bring us to the discussion surrounding UFOs and the chupacabra and even aliens? While over 80% of Puerto Rico claims to be Roman Catholic, one article stated that the real religion is actually spiritualism, and that is dark, occult stuff. So is it? I don't know. Is the chupacabra an alien? I don't know. Is it real? I don't know. Should we consider demonic activity? Yes, we should. Yes, we absolutely should. What about aliens, though, and Native American myths? All right, let's get a little closer to home. The indigenous peoples. Let's talk about Native American myths. One of the most popular is the story of the Mothman. Oh, the Mothman is so interesting. Similar sinister connections exist in the folklore surrounding the Mothman. So, not to confuse categories here, but the Mothman probably falls under more so of the cryptid category, as does the Chupacabra. So, Mothman and Chupacabra probably fall under the category of cryptids, but there is an alien connection as well. His sightings are many times connected to UFO sightings. So, he is most famous for having been spotted by several people perched atop the Silver Bridge over the Ohio River just before it collapsed on December 15th, 1967, resulting in the deaths of 46 people. That is an actual historical event. There's a memorial built to the Silver Bridge now. He's become a sort of legend in Appalachian mythology, dating all the way back to the 1700s, when a curse was pronounced from a dying Shawnee chief, in which he claimed that judgment from the Great Spirit would come upon his executioners. There's a whole story there of this battle that existed, and as this chief was dying, he pronounces judgment from the Great Spirit. The curse is believed by many to have materialized in the form of the Mothman. So here again, we see this occult element, paganism, playing a role in this dark entity's activity. This pagan chief, the Shawnee chief, says the Great Spirit is going to execute judgment. And that seems to be what happens. Prior to the Silver Bridge tragedy of 1967, UFO and extraterrestrial sightings were on the increase in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. There's actually a lot of interesting detail here. We could really talk about this a lot. If you're interested to know more, I want to recommend that you read the Mothman prophecies. There's a lot to these stories, and we could, but I'm not going to spend all the time discussing that. So for time's sake, I'll give you two instances that occurred around the time of the bridge collapse and its connections back to the Mothman. So the Mothman. On November 15th, 1966, couples Roger and Linda Scarberry and Steve and Mary Mellette were driving together on State Route 62 near the abandoned National Guard Armory building and power plant when they saw a menacing figure standing 6 to 7 feet tall. In the headlights, giant eyes shone bright red. Panic set in. Roger, the car's driver, sped away toward town, but the creature followed. According to these first eyewitness accounts, this thing rose up like a helicopter. Though a clumsy runner, as they saw at the power plant, it excelled in gliding, easily keeping pace as the car reached upwards of 100 miles per hour. The next day, the headline, the Point Pleasant Register, read in sort of very 1960s fashion. Couple see man-sized bird, creature, something. This story would ignite a stream of Mothman sightings that would captivate the minds of many in the area to this very day. The Mothman is still a thing in West Virginia. Some claim the Mothman to have emerged from the depths of hell itself, while others claim he's a visitor from outer space. So some say he's from the very depths, some say he's from the very heights. There's a lot of speculation surrounding the Mothman. Again, there's a pagan tie-in. There's an occult element that exists. So this couple drives and they see this creature. It glides right alongside their car, racing down the interstate 100 miles per hour. They tell the newspaper. The newspaper runs this headline. The story explodes. But also, there's another very bizarre story. And I'm probably not going to do it justice in the telling of it because it's just so bizarre. Matter of fact, you can actually listen to the audio recording of the interview taken, I believe, the day after the event occurs. It's out there on the internet still yet. This is the story of Indrid Cold. Just a few weeks before the encounter with Mothman on November 2nd, a salesman by the name of Woodrow Derenberger was traveling home late one night from Parkersville to his suburban home in Mineral Wells, West Virginia, when he suddenly found the highway blocked by a large gray object. Someone emerged from the object and walked to the passenger side window of his car. At the same time, the object moved upward some 50 feet. The man introduced himself as a searcher, brought words of happiness. After noting that he would come again, he stepped into the object and it rose out of sight. Derenberger would go home and tell the story to his wife and then later call the police and the press just puzzled by what happened. He would give an interview that would go on to be somewhat popular and famous, but possibly the most unsettling thing about the encounter is Derenberger's description of the man. This is what Derenberger had to say. His face looked like he had a good tan, a deep suntan. He was not too dark, but it was just like he had been out in the sun a lot and had a good tan. His hair was combed straight back, and it was a dark brown, and he seemed to have a good thick head of hair. His eyebrows, his face, his features were all very normal. I don't believe that he looked any different from any other man you would meet on the street, but he wasn't normal. He had a large grin and kept his arms folded with his hands under his armpits. And though he spoke to Derenberger, his smile never moved. He spoke to Derenberger telepathically. He asked me to roll down my window on the right-hand side of the truck, and I did as I was asked. And this man stood there, and he first asked me what I was called. And I know he meant my name, and I told him my name. When he asked me, he said, "Why are you frightened?" He said, "Don't be frightened. We wish you no harm. We mean you no harm. We wish you only happiness." And I told him my name, and he told me his name. He said his name was Cold. 2 days later, while driving in his car, he began to receive a telepathic communication from the man he had seen earlier. He described himself as from the galaxy of Ganymede, if I'm saying that correctly. He also supplied some information about his life, including the observation that people on his planet lived from 125 to 175 Earth years. Over the next few weeks, other stories would accumulate that substantiated at least part of Derenberger's story, including independent UFO sightings on November 4th. An initial investigation concluded that Derenberger was not a fraud, not a hoaxer, but hallucinations could not be ruled out. And this is all connected back to the idea and the story of the Mothman. Okay, but what about in modern history? What do we have when we think in a modern context? Probably the most famous modern story. I know that we just talked about Indrid Cold, and that was during the 60s, but the most famous modern UFO story has to be the incident that occurs at Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. So was Roswell a military incident, or was it an alien cover-up? Which one was it? Conspiracies abound. Government cover-ups, nuclear testing, hidden secrets. Even former President Donald Trump seems ready to hide from the public all the information that he has and that he knows about Roswell.
Before you leave office, will you let us know if there's aliens? Because this is the only thing I really want to know. I want to know what's going on. Would you ever open up Roswell and let us know what's really going on there?
So many people ask me that question.
I know, it sounds almost ridiculous, but it's actually the real question I want to know.
It sounds like a cute question, but it's actually, there are millions and millions of people that want to go there, that want to see it. I won't talk to you about what I know about it, but it's very interesting. But Roswell's a very interesting place with a lot of people that would like to know what's going on.
But what happened? On a hot summer day in 1947, rancher Mac Brazel found a tangled mass of tinfoil, rubber, wood, wire, and other strange hieroglyphic, and other strange things with a sort of hieroglyphic writing on it. He found this on his property at the ranch that he worked at or owned. I'm not real certain there. But he hid the debris for nearly a month before informing local authorities of his findings. But why would he do that? Why would Mac Brazel find this tangled mass out on his land and just keep it for a month? Why wouldn't he toss it out? Why wouldn't he go report it to somebody? What made him hang on to it? Well, as it turns out, supposedly, Brazel had made the discovery the day after a storm had blown through the ranch. And he was out investigating, trying to find what had happened. The date was June 14th, 1947, and Brazel was checking the property after the storm when he heard a sound like a large explosion off in the distance. So he saddles his horse and heads in the direction of the sound. Upon arrival, he found the strange, tangled mess and collected a mess of the debris. Not all of it, but collected a lot of it. Not sure what to do with it, he told a few close friends who told him there could be a possible financial reward. So he held on to it until he figured out what he wanted to do. It was during this waiting period that another famous UFO event occurs that is kind of overshadowed by the Roswell event. This is what happens between the time of Mac Brazel's discovery and his reporting to the authorities. This is what happens. While flying near Mount Rainier, Washington, seasoned pilot Kenneth Arnold saw 9 disc or pie pan-shaped objects flying at some 1,200 miles per hour based on his calculations. Apparently he could figure that out. He reported the sightings to local news, and eventually national outlets picked up the story of Arnold's flying saucers. Although Arnold himself adamantly denied ever referring to them as flying saucers. He's like, that's not what I said. Don't say I said that, because I never said that. This event occurred on June 24th, some 10 days after Mac Brazel's discovery. So when news makes its way back to New Mexico of the unknown flying objects in Washington, Brazel's more than intrigued. He wants to know what this is. He hangs on to this debris for a few more days, and on July 8th, he reports his findings to Sheriff and friend George Wilcox in Roswell, who in turn brings it to the attention of Colonel William Blanchard, the commanding officer of the Roswell Army Airfield, or the RAAF. Blanchard will dispatch Lieutenant Colonel Jesse Marcel and another intelligence officer to investigate the debris found on the ranch. After several trips in a military jeep following Mac Brazel on his horse, they recover as much debris as possible. Marcel reports back to the RAAF, and a press release is issued claiming the Air Force had recovered and were in possession of the remains of some sort of flying disc. This was the official press release report from the Air Force base. When the press release hit the news, media outlets, they picked up the story very quickly, and on July 8th, they ran the headline, RAAF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region. With alien speculation high and nationwide interest peaked, the debris was sent away to Roswell Air Force Base, and in order to combat the headline, the Air Force releases an official statement referring to the debris as simply a downed air balloon or a downed weather balloon. But those who had seen it seemed to know better. They didn't think that that's what this was. They knew something was going on and that the government just wasn't telling the truth. They just weren't quite sure how. And this is kind of where the story begins to get even more interesting and more deep. Lieutenant Colonel Marcel is tasked with accompanying the debris from Roswell to Fort Worth, Texas. At the airbase in Fort Worth, Jesse Marcel was brought into a private room for a photo op with the debris. There was a problem, though. The debris he saw scattered on the floor was not the same debris he had seen in Roswell and had accompanied to Fort Worth. Sensing his confusion, it's believed that Marcel was coerced into taking pics and identifying the debris as the same material he had collected. So Marcel goes in and he sees this debris scattered on the ground. Some claim you could even see in pictures the box that this weather balloon had been taken out of. And he's like, that's not what I brought in here. So I imagine the conversation probably went something similar to this. I don't have proof of this. This is just my commentary, my version of what I think happened. I imagine the conversation went a little something like, "Sir, there seems to be a mistake here. That's not the material I brought in." Lieutenant Colonel Marcel, "Yes, it is." "Respectfully, it's not. I see the box for the balloon over there in the corner." Lieutenant Colonel Marcel, "It's the same debris." "But it's not, though." Lieutenant Colonel Marcel, you're a devoted serviceman to your country. We don't need any confusion here. You collected a downed weather balloon, and we need to ensure that's what the public knows. Now, Lieutenant Colonel Marcel, yes, it is the same debris. Are we clear? Yes. Yes, it is. There's actually photographic evidence of Lieutenant Colonel Jesse Marcel holding this debris with a look on his face that's just like, really, guy? Seriously? So whether or not that's how it's actually happened, I don't know. But at any rate, Jesse Marcel changed his story from a flying saucer to a weather balloon and took photographs with this debris. And that became the official narrative. For a long time, for years, that's what was told of the happenings at Roswell. And whether intentional or otherwise, it became the birth of modern UFO lore in America. For years, the Roswell incident remained a mystery, with many believing it to be a part of a secret government spy program called Project Mogul. And it wasn't until 1994 that the Pentagon declassified documents on Project Mogul, stating that the U.S. Air Force may have known more than they actually let on. Since World War II, a group of geophysicists and oceanographers from Columbia University, New York University, and the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Cape Cod had been working on a top-secret atomic espionage project at New Mexico's Alamogordo Airfield that they called Project Mogul. Project Mogul used sturdy, high-altitude balloons to carry low-frequency sensors into the tropopause, a faraway part of the Earth's atmosphere that acts as a sound channel. In this part of the atmosphere, sound waves can travel for thousands of miles without interference, much like under the ocean. The scientists believed that if they sent microphones into the sound channel, they would be able to eavesdrop on nuclear tests as far away as the Soviet Union. So those were the declassified documents that were released much later on. And in the midst of this, later on, there would be a group of researchers that would come together, and for 20 years they would research UFO sightings, ufology, and to try to determine what was going on in the skies and in the cosmos. This project became referred to as Project Blue Book, and it's so mysterious. Officially, this research would be completed in 1969, but would still remain classified for at least another 10 years until 1979. And of the 12,618 UFO sightings reported between 1947 and 1969, 701 still remain unidentified. Roswell, Project Blue Book, and of course the infamous Area 51. Alien Base, or Advanced Military Research Center. Located on Groom Lake in the middle of the barren desert of southern Nevada, Area 51 is a U.S. Air Force installation that has become infamous for a speculated connection with unidentified flying objects. For years, the U.S. government denied the existence of any such place. There is no Area 51. It's not real. However, in a 2013 report, the CIA officially acknowledged the base's existence. 2013! 10 years before the recording of this episode. Just 10 years ago, they said, oh yeah, by the way, Area 51? Yeah, it's real. It's real. But what is Area 51? Established in 1955, about 120 miles south of Las Vegas by Aerospace Corporation Lockheed, which is now Lockheed Martin, Area 51 was referred to as Paradise Ranch in order to attract personnel. Because we know that's what all secret military bases want to do, is attract people. It was originally used as a testing facility for the U-2 spy plane and other aircraft. Some pretty interesting things came out of Area 51. I believe the stealth bomber was developed there. A lot of stealth technology and really, really interesting planes came out of Area 51, but the U-2 was sort of the original plane. Due to the secretive nature and covert method of transportation, assembly, and testing, mystery and conspiracy started to surround the facility. I mean, even the name U-2 is deceptive. Rather than referring to the craft as the R2 or Reconnaissance 2, it was called the U-2 or the Utility 2. Civilians and citizens nearby started seeing parts of the U-2 being passed through local areas en route to Area 51, where the plane would be assembled, and later seeing high-altitude test flights. And naturally, curiosity began to grow, and from curiosity, legend was birthed about possible alien aircraft being tested at Area 51. So the legend just kind of naturally formed in an organic way surrounding Area 51 because of the secrecy of the nature of what was happening at the Air Force Base or at the research facility. But that brings us to a gentleman by the name of Bob Lazar. Was Bob Lazar onto something? Possibly. In the late 1980s, a young jet enthusiast turned scientist went on News Channel 8 in Las Vegas to give a now infamous interview with journalist George Knapp concerning Area 51. Operating under the pseudonym Dennis with his face blacked out in the camera, Bob Lazar claimed to have worked in a location south of Area 51 known as S4 and to have knowledge of flying saucers, antimatter devices, and other unhuman tech. One of his most bizarre claims was to use a strange biometric hand scanner to gain access to S4. This claim was laughed away by those of the time as sci-fi jargon. It did so for years, but in modern times, it's fairly common technology. Matter of fact, I've used these biometric scanners before to enter into facilities that had some sort of clearance or whatever. They're real. I've used them. They exist. To verify my own identity, it checks the bones in your hand. Don't ask me how it works. I'm not Bob Lazar. Was Lazar onto something, or has Bob Lazar been lying knowingly and deceiving the American public for 30 years? I'm not sure, but his story is fascinating. Roswell, Project Blue Book, Project Mogul, Area 51, Bob Lazar, Tom DeLonge, other reports, Heaven's Gate cult in 1997 with Marshall Applewhite and the Hale-Bopp comet, the aerial school UFO incident in 1994 in Zimbabwe where over 60 children claimed to see a UFO and speak telepathically with its crew, the 2004 UFO or Tic Tac UFO when pilots actually registered it on the radar, and you can see footage of this UFO today. Recent police body cam footage in Las Vegas when families reported a sighting of seeing 8-foot-tall creatures in their backyard, and the same night officers had seen something fall from the sky. Also, Tiffany Gomez, terrified airline passenger that demanded she leave her plane recently and begged the plane not to take off because she claimed that somebody on board the craft was not real. And, of course, recent testimony between David Grush and Congress when he claimed that the U.S. was in possession of non-human biologics. Should we believe these stories? Our own government has now released an official UAP/UFO website, www.aaro.mil. The All Domain Anomaly Research Office, the AARO, now exists. What should we think about all of these things? The alien mythos exploded onto popular culture in the mid-20th century, going all the way back to Orson Welles and his War of the Worlds radio broadcast, which he would later apologize for. From there, Hollywood creature features have been dazzling the minds of people across the world, terrifying small children, causing teen dates to snuggle in theaters and drive-ins, and providing just good old plain fun. Who doesn't like to see Sigourney Weaver just blasting the soup out of some alien creature aboard a spaceship? The 80s and 90s were a time of rampant UFO activity. With the advent of the internet, popular television shows such as The X-Files, ALF, and Star Trek: The Next Generation. UFO cults gained popularity, with possibly the most famous and saddest being that of the Heaven's Gate cult in 1997. What are we to think about all of these things? Are they true? Are they not true? In all honesty, I don't know. Look, we've been recording for a little over an hour. I'm going to take a break. We're going to come back and we're going to discuss the more technical side of it and hopefully get into some scripture as well. So, guys, we're going to take a break here. Until next time, grace and peace. I'll catch you later.